fine. Okay, there's audio on Twitch, I think. And okay, that should be fine for now. Maybe the desktop audio won't work again, but we'll give that a try once it comes up. So hello everybody, welcome to the March Rust Gamedev Meetup. So this is the third one that we're running. Some things are falling into place a little bit better. There's still a lot of difficulties here and there, but we'll see how it goes. So for today, we have a little bit of a short lineup of people that will be demoing some stuff. However, if you are interested in hopping in last moment, feel free to message me on Discord. If you're watching from Twitch, feel free to hop into the Discord chat as well. There's a few more spaces here, so you can be here in the live chat. On Twitch, I don't see anybody messaging that the audio is not working, so it looks like technical difficulties are so far non-existent. We'll see if they come in and join later. So with the meetup today, we have, as I mentioned, a few different presentations. So first of all, welcome. If you haven't come to the meetups before, my name is Forrest. I am the host of these meetups. We've only run a few of them, but I've kind of gotten into the role pretty nicely, I think. And so I also work on Valoran, which is a game built in Rust, and I'm the co-host of the Rust Gamedev podcast. And so I should also specify that if you have come to watch this on Twitch or anywhere else, thinking that it's about Rust game, like the game Rust and its game development, then unfortunately I will have to inform you that this is about the language Rust. I always just want to make sure, just because there are sometimes people who come in and definitely think it's like the Rust game. But I think since we're in science and technology, the section on Twitch, we should be okay. All right. So the point of these meetups is to try and get a lot of people connected within the Rust Gamedev ecosystem. And so this works by allowing people to show off what they've been working on over the last month. It gives people a place to hang out and within like the Discord kind of chat about what we've been working on, show off some of the cool stuff, and then also get connected to the people who are working on the coolest stuff in the ecosystem. And so I think one of the cool experiences that I've had is the opportunity to be able to talk with so many cool people who are working on such amazing projects within the ecosystem. And so I hope this can grow even further and allow for even better connections to be made and even better like projects to be able to form. And so we're going to start off with the show and tell. And so normally how it works is we have about 5 minutes per person. I'm going to let people go for longer, and I might have like a little bit more of a discussion with people, but we'll see how that goes. And then after that, we're going to have a lightning round. And so as I mentioned to the people in the Discord right now, if anybody is interested in just joining and talking about what they've been working on, but maybe they don't have a large demo, I'd still love to chat with you and kind of hear about the progress that you've been making, as well as maybe some interesting techniques that you're trying out with your projects. And so if anybody is interested in being part of this, feel free to just message me on the Discord and we can get that set up. And so without further ado, I will be back in a minute as we get the first demo underway. so first off, we have Graphite here, Keevan here to talk about Graphite. Keevan, can I just get you to say something just so we can make sure everything's
Yeah,
working?
testing 1 2 3.
Okay, I think that looks good.
Testing 1 2 3.
Someone on Twitch just verify that they are able to hear this time. I just want to make sure we get into this on good footing instead of any issues right off the bat. I don't see anything on Twitch just yet. Hmm. Okay, wait. So they say they can't hear me. Wait, it might be.
Hmm.
Oh wait.
Oh,
Sorry, it makes sense. They can't hear me.
that's testing. Okay, so I guess I can begin. This is sort of a little bit of a progress update since the last presentation a month ago. As a quick reminder, Graphite is basically an aspirational goal of creating an open source vector and raster graphics editor, basically something that can replace all of Photoshop and all of Illustrator or Inkscape or whatever you use as your, or maybe also GIMP or whatever you use as your graphics editor for both raster and vector needs, either 2D or 3D. With the support of everyone who came and hopped on our Discord server in the last month, we've came up with a lot of really helpful ideas about how to improve the development progress and also how to uh, be a little bit more strategic with the development. Specifically, the minimum viable product, we want to make it a lot sooner and a lot simpler, and we want to get it released out so people can actually start using Graphite in a useful way. So starting with a Graphite 0.1 release, we want to sort of shelve the issue about what GUI framework we're going to be using in Rust. Unfortunately, Rust does not have the most mature GUI ecosystems so far, but it is progressing steadily, and hopefully at a future point in time, it will be a little bit better, and we can shift over to that. But at the moment, we are temporarily going to be using a web GUI. This means that we're going to have to support only the web at the moment, even though the eventual goal is to have a native version of Graphite running for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Additionally, we are going to be temporarily using the browser's Canvas API, the HTML5 Canvas API, for rendering just the vector shapes. And also, we will be using Graphite initially just as a vector editor. However, eventually it'll add the raster editing capabilities later down the road. So for the GUI, we would like to make or basically we're taking the old GUI that I was writing. It was about 2,000 lines of code, and we're shelving that. We may or may not revisit it in the future, but at the moment we're switching over to the web GUI. Using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript along with the Vue GUI framework. And we're just going to be using that until eventually Rust GUI's ecosystem improves, and then we can actually scrap all of the web GUI and replace it with an actual native Rust GUI. Then this will compile with WebAssembly. So eventually the native Rust GUI will compile through WebAssembly to the web as well, and we won't have to use HTML, CSS, or JavaScript for any of it. The minimal GUI code will be in JavaScript, so we want to avoid how much code we're going to have to replace eventually. And we're going to write most of the core application code in Rust itself and just provide a small boundary layer between the two sides. That way it's easy to swap it out in the future. So the render backend, also for the minimum viable product, there are several Rust render backends. There's Piet, there is Pathfinder, there is Lion, and a few other smaller ones. But unfortunately, a lot of those are either sort of abandoned. Lion has not been in development for a long time. Pathfinder is Mozilla's render engine, except that when Mozilla had its layoffs recently, it appears that Pathfinder is no longer under active development either. And Piet looks very promising, but it is unfortunately not ready yet for use on the web. So we're going to be temporarily we'll be temporarily using the HTML5 Canvas API provided by the browser, and then swapping it out eventually with something that we probably write on our own. We're going to make the architecture very modular, which allows us to avoid the hassle of rewriting core parts of the code. Instead, we can just modularize it and swap out that module with eventually a new custom render engine once the time becomes needed for that. So for ease and simplicity, we will be using the web's HTML5 Canvas API. And at the moment, we don't need to worry about raster. We're just going to be worrying about the fact that the Canvas API can provide rendering capabilities for vector. Eventually, we'll have to write our own raster render engine. And the minimum viable product is going to support vector editing as its core initial focus. That's because raster is a lot more complex, and it requires a more sophisticated render engine as well as an entire node data graph that powers it as part of the overall vision for Graphite. But we're going to skip that for the beginning and basically focus on improving what Illustrator and Inkscape already do. But unfortunately, both of those programs have a pretty painful user experience, and it's not that fun to use those applications because they aren't designed super well. I think that Graphite has a much better design and a much better user experience. So we're starting out basically with a little bit of a niche of just improving upon the user experience of Inkscape and Illustrator with our initial release. Then for perhaps Graphite 0.2, we can add the features of the node graph and basically make everything procedural. So that way you have a procedural approach to vector editing, which would be, I think, very unique and especially exciting. And then from there, we can move on to raster editing for maybe Graphite 0.3 or something. Now I'd like to show some progress on just the design mockup. So last month we had this, and I probably should have clarified last month that this is a mockup. This is created in Adobe XD. It is not actual live code at the moment. But we did not have anything showing up for the properties panel or the layers panel. And I've since refined it, as well as refined other parts of the UI. And now we have a full properties editor, as well as a layer panel. The layer panel is still somewhat of a work in progress, but we can see now that both of those are populated. Here it is before, and here it is after. One more time, just in case you'd like to see how it's improved since then. This is more of the final vision for Graphite, including the raster editing capabilities. And what we're seeing here with the airplane flying across the desert is more of a proof of concept for a particular workflow with raster editing. However, for the initial vector editing approach, it's kind of just a simplified version of this, but the overall UI and user experience will remain pretty much the same, just with fewer features. Now I'd like to quickly show what we've so far implemented in the web UI. So this is all a screenshot from the browser, and it is static. You can't really click on anything yet, except everything is hooked up with very modular components. So everything you're seeing is a component, basically, and that allows us to just provide it data, and whatever the data is, it will display the component and render it to the browser as needed. So the next step now is to build Rust code that will actually talk to the JavaScript code, and the Rust code will manage the entire core application state. And then from there, the JavaScript is just worried about grabbing the state from the Rust code and displaying it by updating the components. So that is the next step, and that will be what we're tackling for the coming month, as well as hopefully getting some actual shapes to draw to the screen. Yeah, does anyone have questions? I guess I can look at the chat. Question was, is it a browser app? So initially it will be a browser app without any other dependencies. So you just open it up in a browser, just a modern browser, pretty simply. Eventually, the goal then will be to make it a full native desktop app with native performance. It won't be running on Electron or anything. It'll actually be compiled straight from Rust to each of the 4 main platforms, the 4th platform being the web through WebAssembly. Another question is, why are you not using Seed.rs instead of Vue or U? I have not heard of that, but I can take a look at it. Any other questions?
I think I have a few that I can definitely just discuss quickly. So I think one of the things that I'm pretty interested in, so I've kind of joined like a
also,
little bit of
by the way, are people able to hear your microphone?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
on my screen it shows 2 bars, and so I think we're good.
good.
But we'll see. We'll see. They'll tell me if I'm wrong. So with the development process behind Graphite, like sort of what's your sort of goal with how you're going to work between like the maybe like UI team and development teams and other sort of stuff as you want to sort of build it out as a community rather than just your own project?
Yeah, so it's definitely a transition to move it from something that I've been working on mostly in the design phase for a number of years, but also starting with the development that sort of got scrapped in the last month compared to the code I've been writing previously for a year. But I think it's exciting to have more people giving their input. It's been very valuable so far with providing some realignments of the strategy to work towards a minimum viable product much sooner than what I had operationally chosen as basically a core subset of all the raster and vector features.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to be having to start to build actual development teams for specific components. A lot of that will initially begin with just the GUI side of things in terms of having Rust code manage the core application state. But
Mm-hmm.
very quickly after that, it involves actually the document state. So there will be another module that manages the way that the document that you're creating actually stores its data and renders the particular shapes that are within your screen at the time, and eventually also working on exporting that to an SVG format or to a PNG or JPEG format. Um, did that hopefully answer at least half of your question?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's also just interesting to sort of hear how projects are kind of working through a lot of sort of like these growing pains of because I think when you go into a project, like you can like work for like years and years or like however long to come up with some type of vision of it and then like develop it yourself and then kind of release it at that point. But when you start from like the ground up and you want to build a team that focuses on like the development of it, I think that's definitely it can be like a hard path to go down, especially if you're like you want to focus on development, but you have to do project management. So yeah, I
That's very
think
true. I
yeah.
think my skills are probably better as a product manager than they are as a Rust developer because Rust is somewhat new to me. I've been using it for about a year so far,
Mm-hmm.
on and off. But I think that ultimately it will just be a challenge to grow it into more of a development team because so far the Discord server started out with just a few dozen people who are interested, and since the last month after the initial basically announcement last month at this meetup, it's grown to I think like 60 or 70 people, a lot of whom are interested in actual development. So it'll be interesting and challenging to kind of get that up and running.
Yeah, can you toss me the link to the GitHub just so I can just pull it up on the browser here? But
Yeah, just graphite.design will
oh yeah, it's not
redirect you
design.
right
That's right.
there.
That's right. Uh, yeah, and so for people who want to maybe contribute to this as like a side project or just like put in some of their either like advice or come to any meetings, like what's the process for that right now?
Yeah, so at the moment, just join the Discord server. That's definitely the best place to get in contact. Over this weekend, I will be adding a bunch of issues to the GitHub repository, as well as updating some other aspects of the README and different things there. But the goal will be to this weekend have kind of a more approachable way for people to get started. But at the moment, please just send me a message on Discord if you're interested in contributing code, and I can give you something to work on.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely excited to see how the progress of this goes, and I also love seeing it here at the game dev meetups because I think that a big part of like game dev isn't just about like the games that you make, but like a lot of the tooling on the side and how, like a lot of the graphics, and also just using
Absolutely.
this kind of stuff in the Rust ecosystem. So it's definitely pretty cool.
Yeah, especially because a lot of the game development side of the tooling, for example, Substance Designer and Substance Painter, as well as a number of other tools like Houdini that are used in game development, were primarily the inspiration for this project. So it very much lives within the entire game development ecosystem as a whole.
Mm-hmm,
And I
mm-hmm.
think Rust is especially a particularly good opportunity at this time. Still a little bit on the cutting edge, but I think it will be very much the language of the future that will allow Graphite to be successful because of its language choice.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's definitely very exciting to go like and sort of like go to the edge of those frontiers of this new technology used in this way. I think especially like after seeing Figma become so popular as like I believe they use WASM and like some pretty like low level kind of stuff to get the performance that they do. It's really great to see this type of software in the browser. So it's cool
Yeah,
to be able to be part of like the creation of it, I think.
I did see one other question. It was since there's a backend separate from the front end, do you plan on making the CLI, making a CLI front end like ImageMagick? The answer is definitely yes. One of the big, I think, use cases in the future for Graphite will actually be making a very sophisticated and a sophisticated but easy to use way of doing headless image processing. Things that you would use ImageMagick for, I think, will be even better in Graphite. You can do a very powerful number of things in the final vision for what Graphite can do purely from a command line.
And another question from Twitch: will you use multi-threading in WASM?
So I've been looking into that. I think WASM currently does not support that, which is actually very unfortunate because one really good thing about Rust is that it makes using multiple threads very easy because you don't have to worry too much about race conditions or things that sync it up. But if that is troublesome with WASM, that might be one of the core limitations that make it so the web version, at least at this time until they release better multi-threading support for the browsers, it might make it so it's a bit slower, but the eventual native version will be very much, it'll have a very large focus on being multi-threaded. And that's especially easy because of our language choice with Rust. And additionally, we'll be trying to make as many things as possible run on the GPU instead of the CPU, which should further enhance the performance.
Perfect. Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for showing off Graphite again this month, and I hope that we can see some cool updates next month as well.
Yeah. And if it interests anyone, please join the Discord server, whether you're planning to develop or you just want to keep an eye on it. Just join the Discord server. You can go to graphite.design, and that currently redirects to GitHub, and GitHub has a link to the Discord server.
Awesome. I'll also put a link in the announcements here so everybody can check that out.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
this. I think that we have this all set up. All right. So, welcome back, everybody. Now we are going to hear from Aklisma about rafx. You are good to go.
Thanks. Yes, I've been working on a new renderer for. It works with a asset pipeline that Kay has been working on for a while too, and so I just got a little demo running here because I don't want to switch screens too much in case it becomes bothersome. But yeah, this is just kind of PBR based workflow, and with real time shadows. So you can see there's a couple shadows here from the lights. So I want to switch back to a web browser so I can show some diagrams. Okay, is this showing? Great. Okay, so rafx has it's we've got a lot of things in the ecosystem already that are API abstraction layers for graphics, but we don't have very many like high level rendering frameworks. And I would say like a library that would to me falls in that category would be something like Ogre 3D or Horde 3D, that they provide a material system and a workflow for getting your shaders and your other assets into the game and on the screen. But at the same time, it's not like a full engine by itself. Like it doesn't do the physics or networking or other things like that. And so rafx has 4 tiers to it. The first one is a low-level API. It would be kind of like GFX HAL or some of the other libraries that they just abstract the API. This one it's an unsafe abstraction, and it's a smaller API surface area. So, for example, a lot of libraries we have in the Rust ecosystem try to mimic Vulkan, and they expose every feature that Vulkan has, but not all of those features map very well to other APIs. So it can get complicated to try to mock those features as if they exist. So the API abstraction in this library is limited to things that are fairly easy to support on a wide variety of APIs to keep things simple, but you can still do quite a lot with it. The framework level adds a lot more like helpful utilities because the API itself is unsafe. So you have to track the lifetimes of objects. And so, for example, if you tell the GPU to render something, you're not allowed to delete it until that command flushes all the way through the GPU, and the GPU is not gonna reference it anymore. And if you mess it up, you could crash and like actually blue screen a computer. So it gets tricky. So the framework provides a lot of tools to help with that, like keeping things in memory as long as the GPU is referencing them, and adding synchronization where necessary, so that if the GPU is writing to a piece of memory and then something else is going to read from it, that happens in the correct order and they don't try to do it at the same time. The asset tier adds integration with Distill, and this adds a lot of fairly sophisticated things. So for example, packing all the assets into just a flat binary that's really fast to load, so you can do all your processing offline. So, for example, generating bitmaps, compiling shaders. Some of this isn't there yet, but it's kind of a work in progress. The pipeline for all that's there. It's not fully integrated with Distill. The goal eventually is that you can modify a source file like a texture or a shader, and it just goes through the pipeline. You don't have to think about what you have to compile. The renderer adds a more structured, kind of opinionated way to bootstrap all of this, so that you just don't have to worry about threads or anything. You just it has kind of a plugin system. And the idea there is that it's difficult for a lot of people want to use a renderer, but they're not really looking to go too deep on the rendering side. They just want to use it. And it's traditionally difficult to combine multiple people's rendering code into the same application and make them all work well together without having to know fairly deeply how to integrate things and kind of hack them all to work together. So that's still, I think, a very open research question is how to do that. But that's something that I'd like to get to eventually. Are there any questions about that so far?
I don't think I see too much in the chat just
Okay.
yet.
So I'll just go through a few key features. One is that rafx is multi-threaded from the ground up. A lot of multi-threading in Rust, it relies heavily on an ECS system that just knows what you're reading and writing, and it schedules everything for you. Rafx has a render thread, and you supply a main thread. This is the way most commercial engines work. And let me find a diagram that shows this. There's quite a bit of documentation here, so I would encourage, if you have questions after this, to take a look. So there's this diagram here. So what this is showing is that you would do all your simulation work, and then there's a critical section here where you can save off all of the things that would happen that you need for rendering. And then once you've got all that saved off, then the simulation can continue on the next thread, and the rendering thread can produce what it needs to do. It's actually pretty intensive to produce the binary amount of data that just needs to be sent to the GPU. It's almost like compiling code. It's having to compile instructions for the GPU to execute. So it's not cheap to write command buffers and send them to the GPU. So being able to do it on a separate thread like this is really helpful. Additionally, there's a lot of extra things you'd want to do, like if you want to determine what's visible or do LODs or cloth rendering. There's a lot of things that are visible only that don't affect the gameplay that could easily be off the main thread if you keep your rendering on a separate thread. As far as someone asked about WebAssembly threads, there's no reason you can't just do the simulation, extract, and then the render thread all in one thread. So it would be easy to map this to a single thread. I will say that if I have to choose, I'm going to choose making this work well for a native environment over web. I have I guess I shouldn't talk too much about it because I'll start ranting, but I don't really enjoy the web. So I do think there's times when you have to choose what you want to do, especially in an open source project. There's just not infinite amount of time to work on things. So, and the web is so different from native platforms that it's difficult to do them both. So yeah, so this is called pipelining a lot of times. Another thing I wanted to mention is there's a shader processor. There's a pipeline here. So different graphics APIs need different forms of data, and instead of having it can be tricky to just like do this really simply. So there's a custom program that's command line that you can do cargo install graphics shader processor, and you can run your shaders through this tool, and it produces it translates things to metal shaders. This is using Spur of Cross. It compiles the Vulkan shaders. It produces Rust code. I'll show some of that. So it auto generates Rust code that matches your shader. And then there's some reflection data that's necessary at runtime, and it combines all of that into a binary. I see another question about. I'll come back to that in just a minute, but I did see it. I should have mentioned at the start. There's two backends right now. One is Metal and one is Vulkan. The project does run on mobile devices, or at least I've tested it on iPhones. Presumably, it may work on Android phones. I just don't have one to test. But since there's a Vulkan backend, it should be possible to make it work. One of the really neat features about Distill is that it can stream assets to a remote device. So I'll show this video. This isn't this code. This is a different piece of code, but it's using this renderer, and this is using Distill. So you can see I'm changing a text file here, and it streams an update to the phone. And it's not just streaming the positions of things; it's actually streaming the textures and meshes and all that stuff too. So the long-term goal is that you can be doing things in Photoshop or Blender and export it, and then it just pops into your phone, which would be really neat. I guess I'll mention again. There's a lot of documentation here. So if you want to know more about it, and I'm not around, you could look here. I would kind of flag this one, this API design in Rust pseudocode. If you want to get a quick feeling for what the low-level API looks like, this is just I just kind of threw together some Rust pseudocode that just kind of covers all the functions. I just find it sometimes it's really easy to tell how things work when you just put everything like this in one place. So there's a bunch of create functions on device, and then command buffers, record them in this way. And this will look pretty familiar if you've used other rendering APIs. I think I've talked a lot, so you should probably ask some questions, or I can answer some questions from Discord chat.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I think definitely there's a lot of things that I've seen here that I'm quite interested in chatting a little bit about. And I think I should also mention that although like I'm in the graphics field like a medium amount, but I think some of the questions I might ask might not be like posed properly or like from like a graphics expert or anything like that. But I think one thing I'm pretty interested in kind of knowing more about is since you're working on your own sort of like graphics engine from the ground up, you mentioned that you're implementing like PBR, but are there other like more modern technologies that you're implementing in your engine that, or like rather render that you haven't seen in other things?
At this point, I'm really focusing on getting the fundamentals right, because I feel that if you don't get the foundation right, it's going to be hard to build anything that's forward looking on top of it. PBR, I'll say that PBR is like an approach. It's almost like a philosophy. So it stands for physically based rendering, and it's not necessarily a particular algorithm. It's just an approach that if you're going to render something that's presumably based on real world, like even if it's a fictitious environment, things are generally going to be like made of stone or metal or something that's familiar to the real world. It just turns out that if you render things that look like real world things, it's usually aesthetically pleasing anyway. So even if you're doing something totally like cartoon style, PBR still can be useful. And by PBR, I mean like you instead of just kind of like throwing dot products together until you see something that kind of works, you look at the physics behind how light works, and then you try to mimic that. So
Okay.
like your lights, you might put them in the world and record their intensity in the form of lumens, and ensure that the distance the light travels and the way and how much light reflects somewhat represents what would happen in the real world based on just the physical properties of things.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely pretty cool. Because I think I've seen it to a certain extent, but I think like the graphics courses I took never really got up to some like the either the like I suppose like going into the concepts behind the philosophy. But I think other than that, you also like demoed the direct link to sort of like hot reloading on mobile, and so with that that idea and that kind of stuff that you're playing with, is this something novel that you haven't really seen in other places?
Yeah, hot streaming assets to a device and hot reloading them. Now, I should fully say that it's not working for every asset type, and there's still work to be done.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of commercial engines that can't do that. So
Yeah.
it is I think a feature that if we could have this in the Rust ecosystem, it would actually make Rust pretty attractive for people that aren't set on any particular environment.
Yeah, yeah, I
And that's
definitely.
mostly Kay's work, I should say.
Oh yeah,
He had that working before I ever touched it. But yeah, it's neat. But yeah, getting assets are so tightly integrated with rendering that you kind of need them both, and they need to work together.
hmm
So
so you'd have to like kind of
that's
build up a
why they're
system from
kind of
scratch with that.
integrated in this demo.
Yeah, yeah, okay. And then yeah, because I think seeing the sort of like the mobile device and you're just editing like stuff on your computer and it sends it directly. That's very cool to see. So I love that kind of demo for sure. There's a question in chat here. What diffuse model are you using?
What diffuse model?
Yeah,
Is that a PBR related question? I'm trying to
I'm
find the
not
original
sure. There's
question.
not too much extra content. Oh yeah, PBR related. Yeah.
Well, I'm following the same kind of design choices that Unreal did. They had a paper, I think it was SIGGRAPH 2011, where they showed which specific functions they use for the different aspects of PBR. So if you're asking like which, I don't remember the names. They all have names that are based on whoever wrote the paper. I don't remember the last names of those people, but yeah, it's just based on what they chose. And at the time, and so this is kind of dated because it's from 2011-ish, and what they chose might not have been like what you could do on today's modern GPUs. But on the other hand, it's still a good trade-off. And if you want this to be able to run on an integrated GPU, then in fact, this is running on an iGPU technically. Um, so it's not always bad to use an older technique that's well known and is performant. But I could show the shader. Maybe I should just do that because I wanted to show the auto-generate code anyways. I know we're running long, so I'm just going to make
Oh,
this
no
short.
worries, no worries. I think we're doing pretty all right on time.
All right. So I mentioned that there's that tool that produces the shaders and some reflection data. So this is this is how you'd run it. Like you can run, if you do cargo install rafx shader processor, then you just do rafx shader processor and all this. So that's going to process the shaders, which are here. And so like I have them separated to where you have the frag and vertex code of the shader, and then they pound include a kind of a header. The one of the things that the tool does is it supports having a markup language here, so we can add some features that to wire things up automatically in the shader. So there's a concept of an immutable sampler in a lot of GPU APIs now. So instead of having to write the code to do that, you can just kind of specify it here, and then that just sets up the sampler for you whenever you load the shader. So this is kind of the header for the mesh shader, and then I'll jump into the frag shader just because it will probably answer the question of whoever asked that. That's all the shadowing stuff. Sorry. Yeah, it's this. So I don't know if that's meaningful enough, but yeah. Here's the link. I'll just drop. And I guess you can figure out where I'm at.
Perfect. Yeah, if you drop that in chat, that'd be good. And another question: how is performance of your metal backend faring against Molten VK?
It's actually worse by about 10%. But there's some things that Metal does that to track resources that I haven't turned off yet, and I expect that the performance will be better after I do that. But I've been more focused on making things work than getting optimal performance. What I value about having a Metal backend isn't much gaining a performance, although I think that could happen. What I value is that you're running a lot less code at runtime. You're not having to do a shader compilation at runtime, and I feel like there's just a lot less to go wrong.
Yeah.
So, and if something does break, then now all the tools that Xcode has, they map one-to-one with the code you're actually working with. So I don't like going through a thick layer like Molten VK because it's obscuring what's actually happening. And if I need to put some workaround in to fix a platform, especially if you were shipping this in a real title and you've got this project and you're in the last 1 month of it and you just can't make dangerous changes.
Yeah.
Being able to make a point fix specifically to the Metal backend to me is really valuable because then it limits what you could be breaking with that fix.
Interesting. Yeah, this is definitely some pretty cool stuff to see. I'm glad that you're able to show some of it off today.
And I did want to show one more thing.
Yeah.
This is the Rust code that's generated automatically. So like it would generate the struct for you, and it puts the padding in so that when you push data to the GPU, then it's properly lined up with the shader. There's other options in the Rust ecosystem that use proc macros for this. But again, I really value being able to just set a breakpoint in this type of code and just see what's happening. And there's some other like auto-generated code, like some constants here. And then this is essentially a type-safe descriptor set. So you can just set the image of, so like set shadow map images or, yeah. So it makes it a lot easier to work with a descriptor set, a lot safer.
I see. Now, I think this is definitely like just a question that I'm asking without knowing as much in-depth Rust as you do. But when you say you're giving code that's like pre set up, and that's different than a macro, do you just mean that someone could go into this and like set a breakpoint to see what the data is at this point while it's running?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's questionable. I mean, you can't set a breakpoint on the GPU, so I
Mhm.
could see how someone might say, well, it's not very useful, but I like being able to set a breakpoint here and make sure this is getting called, or see the stack trace where it's being called from, or be able to inspect the arguments it's being passed. I mean, in this case, it's kind of an opaque. It's a texture, but if it was like one of those structs above, like this, then wherever it's being passed into a function, then you'd be able to, set a breakpoint and see what the data is.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty cool because I definitely, although I haven't done too much graphics dev, I do know that debugging on the GPU is like incredibly difficult just because you have to do it outside of the GPU. And so, yeah, I think giving tools around that where possible is definitely a good approach. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Klisma, for showing off rafx, and I think it'd be awesome to see sort of some changes in the future as they come along. Yeah. So thanks.
Definitely, and I'll reply to questions in Discord. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. Oh, and sorry. Are you going to share the browser? All right, there we go.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So
here we go. Okay, I think we got mic and desktop working. Okay, so we're good to go.
Cool. So yeah, I showed this off last month, and I wasn't necessarily planning on doing an update, but I got hit up this morning about whether or not I still wanted to show off, and I was like, well, most of the stuff I've been doing is in the back end. So if you guys remember this from last month, or if you're new to this, essentially it's just a passion project of mine to build an MMO sandbox that is kind of set in space. And some of my initial design ideas are based off of EVE Online, although my main focus is going to be more on building a PvE cooperative type sandbox. There's still going to be politics and stuff involved, but I'm not so much focused on combat in this. Ultimately, I'm more working on the back end and the technology while I'm still trying to figure out what the sandbox is. So I'm much more prepared to talk about the tech that I'm using. So in terms of updates of what I've done since the last month, I ended up getting a second contributor to the project. I wasn't planning on that. Someone just came along and we hit it off. We've been chatting like multiple hours a day on Discord every day. And he's been kind of helping take some of the back end stuff that I was trying to keep simple and using his knowledge and expertise of having previously used Quinn and WebRTC and other projects, and bringing those to be able to use it inside of Cosmic Verge instead of WebSockets, because WebSockets are based on TCP, as most people know, which means that you can have, TCP requires the SYNAC process, and that can sometimes cause, latency. So if you're actually going to cosmicverge.com and piloting, I'm not even logged in. It's how I've only recently set up Linux over here. You would potentially see a little bit of stuttering, and that's ultimately because of a TCP having to resend a packet after a short delay. So that's going to go away as we adopt Quick and eventually WebRTC on the web. The other big change is that I have brought back to life my native game engine because after talking with him, he encouraged me to bring it back. So I've updated this to WGPU 0.7 in the past month, and I tried getting it running on WASM. It unfortunately is not there yet because this is a fully async runtime. It's pretty complicated, but I did actually get really far, and I ran into a limitation that it seems like in WASM, the WebGL backend doesn't support creating uniform buffers currently, although it looks like it might have been patched on or fixed on GFXRS's master. So it's like hopefully soon coming to WGPU. So in theory, this will mean that I will have a native client for Cosmic Verge as well as a WebAssembly version. It's all built on my game engine instead of a 2D canvas like I was talking about last month. So those are the major changes since last month. Yeah, what kind of questions do you have?
Yeah, so I think one thing I remember from last month is that there were several. So when you were demoing it, several people hopped online, and so I was wondering, was there any like interesting telemetry that you got from having like more players online and kind of just seeing how everything worked?
No, because I didn't really have good telemetry in place. So ultimately, the way I architected it is really lightweight, and having 10 people on a server wasn't going to change anything. Having hundreds of people would be potentially where I start seeing something on the node size that I was using at the time. But the reality is Rust is just so fast that all of this is overkill until you start throwing hundreds or thousands of things at it. And I never got to my goal of trying to get to actually doing some, load testing, partly because we decided to kind of revamp the back end as part of him hopping onto this, since essentially I was wanting to work on the game. And, that's kind of what my goal of the project was last month. And then having him come in and say, I really want to help build a better back end, allows me to still focus on the game. And he's going to be hopefully making this even more powerful than in my original design. So
okay. And so when I hear that you started with like a simple backend, you're working on improving, like making more complex, what I sort of would understand from that is you have maybe a backend that's designed to just like take player position and like what their input is, and then like redistribute that to other players. And then when you're upgrading, like you're adding like a more like a stronger backend to sort of like mitigate potential issues. So what kind of stuff does it include in the backend upgrade?
Yeah, so the main thing was I don't love deploying Redis into environments because it's kind of a pain to get a nice resilient Redis cluster up and running. And I was using Redis to synchronize data between the web servers, as well as a kind of a shared memory store for some of the positional information, because Redis is a very fast key value store. And one of the goals of this refactoring is to get rid of Redis and essentially use a cluster-based synchronization for some of that data. But unlike my current design, where there was a single Redis instance, so we had one big chunk of shared memory, essentially, we're going to be splitting up the system data so that individual system updater tasks that run inside of our overall cluster will manage the system data itself and replicate it with a backup node that can take over in case the main one fails, and so we're making more of the data local to specific servers as opposed to having to be synchronized across the entire infrastructure. And so in theory, that will make it a lot easier to scale horizontally and vertically, frankly.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's some really interesting side of like distributed computing when it comes to like these types of server shards, because as you describe, if all of the information that a system needs to hold like is discrete and separate from other systems, then definitely having sort of it stored on one server that's doing the computations on it, but then also backed up to some type of node, does make it incredibly highly distributable. I think that of course, like when you're designing architecture and stuff like this, you do have to be very conscious of the fact that if you start having data that crosses the boundary between like one system to another, then you very quickly have a lot of data that needs to be passed back and forth. But that's a pretty cool way to go. And so with sort of like how you see yourself working on like the improvements and stuff over the next month, what kind of things are you excited about like implementing and working on?
Yeah, so the other contributor, Daxpeta, is working on that stuff, and I've been, really working on trying to make the code base more approachable, and that's going to continue. So there's certain things that I've become very opinionated over my previous business experience of running things that makes me want to do things in a specific way. So I'm building out a logging facade myself because I don't really feel like deploying a bunch of those logging management stuff, and trying to build this in a very privacy-centric focus. So I don't want a lot of data, even log data, to be handled by a third party. So I want that to be in-house. And again, I'm trying to not run a ton of extra software. And so to me, I can build a pretty decent logging facade. So I've been working on that. And of course, I'm going to continue working on building up the native app. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when it does come into like a lot of logging, so for example, you can collect whatever you want, send it to like LogRocket or like Datadogs or anything like that, and then have them do like a whole bunch of nice graphs for you. But then I think the other side is it would be amazing to see this type of like this type of software be like available within the Rust ecosystem. And so I think definitely, since what you're doing is I mean, if you're trying to do something and there's not a Rust solution, then what you're doing is novel. It would be very cool to see like what your solutions are for gathering this type of information in a web-based game. Yeah, I think that's definitely a pretty neat approach. Now for the sort of like game design and like sort of like just the general idea of what like the player will experience. So you have systems that are set up for like ships to be able to go from like one system to another. But have you put much like design thought into what like the player experience might be, like what their like objective in the game is, what kind of like feedback loops they have and stuff like that? Or is it kind of just you're going technology based, like whatever point you're at, you're kind of just adding anything in whenever it needs?
So I have a lot of visions, but they're kind of vague, and there are obviously things that can change at this point, because that's kind of what I mean, that it's still in flux. So the things that really are interesting to me about like Eve, because I said that's a big inspiration for me, is the player-driven economy for one. The idea that you can buy and sell basically everything on the market, and what they didn't really provide, like JITA is a solar system in Eve, and the developers didn't pick it as the trading hub. Instead, what happened was people just over time started like amassing, because they realized that so much stuff was available in that system. People kept going to that system for more of their market needs, and it just eventually became the largest trade hub in the game. And essentially, I want to build a similar economy, which economies are, if you think about MMOs, most things can all be said that they're part of an economy of some sort. And so when you boil that down to its core, that means, mining resources and then whatever the products that you build from them, and then whatever you might get from monsters or whatever is the MMO's, enemies. Again, I'm trying not to necessarily focus on combat in my game necessarily. So it's going to be more like exploring planets and things like that. The things you can find from doing those activities all should tie into a market. And you want to have these different systems so that someone who wants to just be a miner, or someone to be able to extract resources from planets or asteroids or something like that, can really focus on that and enjoy that activity, and not really have to care about the rest of the game. That's something you can do in Eve. You can focus on one activity, and I want that to be true in this sandbox as well. So there's going to be separate individual ecosystems like resource collection, exploring planets to get different things. What makes my design a little bit different, which I think is probably a little more interesting thing to answer, is one of the concepts that I think is very compelling is the concept of knowledge being an actual asset in the game. And that can, sorry for the alarm. And the idea being that even knowledge itself could be traded. So at a high level, I have a vision that there can be an in-game wiki almost, that different fragments can be discovered by exploring different planets or doing various things. And when you get that piece of knowledge, it may be something that no one else has ever seen in the game. And if you want to, you could contribute it to the public wiki or the public library, let's call it, and you might get some, other, some credibility or some sort of, karma points or whatever for doing that, goodwill points. And so that might be some way to like brag, like, hey, look how much I've done for the entire community because I've done this. But if that piece of knowledge is also part of helping you understand how to build a new recipe or something like that, you might decide to hoard it instead and try to be the first person to be able to have this new module and be able to sell it on the market. Of course, you're running the risk that someone might still find that same piece of knowledge somewhere else, and so you may not ever be able to capitalize on the credit, the cred boost by releasing it publicly if someone else does it first. So it's that sort of interplay of kind of knowledge management and the idea that I can generate new pieces of lore and knowledge to put into the system without having to do new big expansions. So I want to have a rolling content updates in the point that people just are out exploring and they randomly discover something that they've never seen before, rather than, oh, there's a new content update, I'm going to log in and play, and I'm going to specifically seek out these new things that were added. I want people to just be experiencing new things all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool social dynamic to add to this type of game, where especially like if players can focus on so many different like sort of tasks, but they maybe you have the fighter who wants to just be in battles all the time versus the miner who wants to just build up their corporation of ability to mine and gather resources, but then you further the experience of every single player by allowing everybody to gain unique knowledge that they can then like almost like patent for themselves in game and stuff like that. And so yeah, that's a very cool sort of vision. I think it definitely does allow for a lot of emergent behavior as well. So yeah, I'd love to see how this is coming along in the next few months and sort of see what the progress on this is like. And so if you want to drop links to this in Discord, I can add it to the announcements, and anybody can go and check out Cosmic Verge. So thank you very much, Acton.
Thank you.
Make sure audio is all working. I think desktop. Okay, perfect. So next up we have Jemadazi, who's going to talk to us a little bit about a game that they're working on called MineWars.
Yeah, so basically I had this idea to turn Minesweeper into a real-time strategy. And the core premise that allows for that is that you can capture the mines on the map and you can move them around your territory to defend yourself, or also use them offensively to cause explosions. And you're trying to fight for these cities, which are like the checkpoints. And you eliminate other players when you capture their cities, and you try to expand your territory. And the more territory you have, the more your cities will be able to produce more mines for you. And you can also capture mines you find out in the wild or explode them or whatever. And so this screenshot you're seeing right now is an old version, which was the playable prototype that I made back in October to playtest with a few friends. And we got a lot of good ideas from that, like switching to a hexagonal grid and better input mechanics to make the game more intuitive to use. So I'm working on the new version right now. And the plan is that I kind of wanted to go public with this game around this time right now. So I'm setting up a website, devlog, Twitter, and so on, so that people who are interested can stay updated. And I want to make a demo that can be ready for public playtesting, so that anyone interested in the game can try it out and give feedback on the multiplayer mechanics. And yeah, so my kind of hope for this is that after we figure out the gameplay, because from the initial playtest it seems quite fun. I've played with a few friends, and we got a few games going, but the performance was awful and the input controls were awful in the old version. So I have to rework that for it to be actually enjoyable. But the core gameplay idea seems good so far. So when I make the playable demo, I look forward to being able to play test it with people. And then after that, I want to focus on it becoming more of a social esports thing. So I am really focusing on a good spectator experience. I've already experimented with prototyping replays and spectator modes and things like that in the game, to be able to view different players and watch games live and things like that.
Yeah, this is definitely pretty cool. Kind of just looking at this, I think I saw in your first screenshot here that you have it says Bevy at the top. So are you building it through with Bevy?
Yeah, this is in Bevy.
Interesting. I'd love to chat about this for just a few minutes, just because I've been playing with Bevy a little bit myself, and I've definitely found that there's, although like I've like learned loving about some of the systems and like the idea of like the plugins as like a first class citizen. There's definitely like a lot to be desired, sort of like functionally and just usability in general. So for yourself, how have you found using Bevy as like a pretty new engine?
I really enjoy using Bevy, and I have really high hopes for the project because the community is lovely and the development activity is going really fast. So while I'm building my game, I'm trying to support the community and the project in whatever ways I can, whether that's with discussion, by participating in discussions or code contributions or whatever. And we're going to get some really exciting new stuff, like someone is working on physically based rendering for 3D and all kinds of other cool things. And the new release is going to come out very soon. It's going to have a lot of features that were very desired that were missing before. And then we're going to focus on UI and stuff to make the game engine enjoyable to use. But for me personally, for my game, I've been enjoying it a lot. And what I can say is that even though it's kind of lacking higher level features, like say animation or whatever, I don't really need them for my game at this point. And actually coding game logic in Bevy is just such a joy. It's really nice.
Yeah, interesting. So I think as I've been playing around myself with Bevy, I've been playing around sort of this with the entity component system, and also this is like one of my first experiences like properly going through and like learning a lot of this, sort of like through the tutorials that are there. And so with like how you've been making use of like game logic and graphics, have you found that there's any like really unique parts of either Rust or Bevy that have allowed you to do stuff that you wouldn't have been able to in other engines or technologies?
Well, definitely, like this whole thing, because Bevy just makes it so ergonomic to make arbitrary logic encoded through the entity component system. It's very simple and intuitive to use. And yeah, my general impression is that whatever parts of Bevy are already available are really nice to use and just so ergonomic. And thanks to Rust, we get the compiler helping out, which means we can easily refactor code and easily tweak things without worrying about breaking stuff. And the general Rust language stuff is just very helpful for being able to be productive.
Yeah.
And yeah, the tricky part with Bevy is that, of course, after you go beyond the basics and you have more complicated use cases, because it's a new game engine and it's still relatively unexplored, you can hit a really steep learning curve where you have to dig into it yourself, and it can get complicated. But that's just because proper support in Bevy hasn't come yet. But Bevy is making such fast progress that I have hopes that soon that's not going to be the case anymore. It's going to be good all around.
Yeah, I think definitely seeing all of the strides that are coming from, I think the fact that it's a new engine, a lot of people are excited about that. A lot of development's happening on it. A lot of people have been contributing and like having big discussions about sort of what the engine needs to be, but also the fact that we're able to iterate on so much previous knowledge about game engines and entity component systems, specifically in Rust, and what works well and what doesn't work well. And so I think this is definitely
a big part of this, is that Bevy can learn lessons from Amethyst and from other previous projects.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's definitely pretty exciting. Now, I'm also wondering, sort of on the game design side of things. First of all, I love the idea of taking like existing ideas, like so for example in this case Minesweeper, and kind of exploring what could be like a enhancement on the gameplay. And so, although you took Minesweeper as an inspiration, it does look like there's a lot that you've added to this. And so I think another thing to compare this to is that it looks very similar to like maybe a board game, but at a much larger scale, because of course I wouldn't want to place all these tiles in a board game. And so what types of enhancements have you added that you wouldn't like, or rather that work well as a sort of video board game kind of thing?
Well, it's not really a board game. I would compare it more like the other inspiration is from something like Civilization or something like that, because you have these cities and these regions and territory control on a procedurally generated map. And so right now it looks like this because this is a placeholder programmer art.
Yeah,
I'm trying to make the gameplay work. And the plan is that after we have a playable demo, I'm going to work with an artist. I have a friend who offered to make like a basic visual overhaul for free for me. But if the game becomes, if there's a lot of interest for the game, I might try to do some sort of crowdfunding campaign so that I could hire an artist to maybe make 3D assets and totally do a visual revamp of the game to make it look good.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like a very admirable approach, is to go and implement like a lot of the gameplay first, make sure that it's a fun game, make sure that everything works in this very I wouldn't even call this a mock-up. Like I'm looking at this and I love this aesthetic personally, but I think definitely if you're gonna go down the line and like you know what the game is, you know what you want it to look like, then it's definitely it would be exciting to see where the progress on it goes.
I have an idea for the gameplay, but so far I have the old demo that you saw in the other screenshots, which was very limited because performance was really bad and the input mechanics were very clunky. But it was enough to play it with some friends and get an idea for how the gameplay works. And I think the core concept is really solid, but I need to try the new ideas I had for how to improve the input controls and these other things, which I'm doing with this version. So when I'm ready with that, I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for the quick lightning chat here. It's definitely cool to see sort of the behind the scenes and just chat about it, even if we don't have too much gameplay to look at just yet. But I'm just kind of hearing some of the ideas behind it. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Just before we finish, I am in the process of setting up the website and Twitter and things like that for this game for anyone who's interested in learning more about it. And in the next few days, whenever that's ready, I can post some links.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, if you post them in the Gamedev Rust here or Gamedev Discord here, we can definitely make sure that they're shown off and stuff like that. So anybody who's watching on Twitch, make sure you go to the Discord, which is either linked on, I think it's linked on Twitch, and then you can check out not only this project but all of the previous ones. I'll make sure there's links up to that, but then also discuss with the creators throughout the month on the kind of stuff they're working on. All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I think this is good. So now, so this is the end of the show and tell section of the meetup. So I'm just going to go into announcements. And just a reminder, in future meetups, if you have any announcements that you would like at this section, please feel free to just message me and we can work on getting them in. And I should also mention that there were a lot of like questions and like discussion points in the Discord that I didn't bring up because I didn't scroll down at all. But again, go check out the chat there if you're interested. See the kind of stuff that's going on. But for the announcements, so Rust Gamedev podcast, we don't have a new episode out just yet. We're thinking probably like in the next week or so. We're recording a few others as well, and so hopefully there'll be some pretty cool content incoming. And then I just also want to mention, so first of all, the February edition of the Rust Gamedev newsletter is out, so make sure to go read that and see all of the cool projects that are going on in the ecosystem. But we also want to make a call for volunteers. And so if you are interested, first of all, in just kind of being a part of the newsletter, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. Each month, we curate a whole bunch of content that has gone on like around the ecosystem and then work to show it off in this newsletter. And so we need people to come in and sort of write about different articles that have gone out throughout the month. We need people to come in and write about different project updates. But then also, if you're working on your own cool stuff in the game dev ecosystem, feel free to come and tell us about it and add something to the newsletter itself. And so we do this all through GitHub issues and just like the Rust Gamedev GitHub. And so you can take a look at it there if you like. And then, of course, like if you message me on Discord or just drop a question in the GameDev Discord, we'll definitely get to it. So that is it for this month. Thank you, everybody, for coming out, and we will see you all in April.